SMS Zaki Muhammad, CEO of Yayasan MENDAKI, Zuraida Abdullah, and everyone who's here this morning. Thank you for inviting me to join you at this sixth MENDAKI Symposium, in fact coinciding this year with your 40th anniversary of MENDAKI. The theme is a broad one, rethinking education. It's a well-chosen theme, not just for the Malay Muslim community, but for Singapore. Education has been and is our most fundamental social and economic strategy. Since the early days, and even now when we look to the future, education is how we develop the social attributes we need to be a vibrant and cohesive society. It's how we develop the skills that we need to be a competitive economy. But more than just specific social or economic skills and capabilities, education is how we shape the character of our nation. It has been and remains fundamental to the character of the future Singapore. And if you think hard about the issues which DPM Lawrence Wong spoke about yesterday, particularly in forging a new social compact, education is fundamental to that. It's where it starts, but it's not just where it starts. It's something that shapes our lives as we go forward together. So education is key to that future social compact. And I will offer a few thoughts on three areas which we are focusing more on, but need to put a lot more effort into in education as part of that effort to build our future social compact. I will talk about three areas. First, the importance of reducing the early gaps. Reduce those early gaps. We have to work a lot harder to even out the playing field in the youngest years of life. And we have to work harder against the natural tendency in every society for the early disadvantages and early advantages to be preserved and even reinforced through life. That's critical. It's critical for Singapore where everyone has a fair chance to do well and to move up. And it's critical to us being an optimistic society. Whatever comes, no matter what comes, what challenges we face, we must be an optimistic society, and it's at its core not about the economic challenges we face, but about that intrinsic optimism in our people, because they feel they've got a fair chance to do better, to survive the odds, to overcome the odds, and do better in life. So that's the first objective. Reduce the early gaps, which are critical. Second, we've got to continue to broaden the range of merits that are recognized and promoted in a meritocracy. Broaden our meritocracy, and that too starts in the growing years. And importantly too, we have to reduce the still sharp hierarchy of skills between the academic and non-academic skills, between some academic skills and other academic skills. We have too sharp a hierarchy of skills, and we have to blur that hierarchy and give everyone a chance to pick up different skills and to develop respect for different skills. That too has to start young, and it continues into the working years, so that we have a workforce and society where every skill is valued and every job well done is respected. That's the second challenge. The third challenge that we have to work harder on is to strengthen our sense of togetherness across different socio-economic groups, across different ethnic groups. We have to strengthen our sense of togetherness. We've avoided the big problems in many other societies, but we have to do even better in Singapore for the future. And that means avoiding social distances that develop even when children are young and stay through life. And importantly, just develop that sense of familiarity, friendship, and solidarity that we must have with each other as Singaporeans. And that comes not from textbooks, it comes from experiences. Experiences of growing up together are critical. And we do need more social mixing amongst children from different backgrounds as they grow up. We need more social mixing. So those are three areas where we have to put more effort into, apply more thought to, and design programs to ensure that we address them effectively. And I will speak briefly about each of the three. First, on reducing the early gaps. The gaps are very evident to all of us who are involved in education and community work. They're evident in the preschool years. You see it even in preschool graduation ceremonies. They're evident in primary one. It's not just about PSLE scores and the like. The gaps are evident in primary one. And it requires a concerted effort by government, by community groups, and by our preschools and primary schools to address these gaps. For the Malay community, this is a particularly important issue. The community has clearly progressed at every level of education. In fact, as many of you know, if you look at our Malay students in our school system and you compare them to students abroad, the achievement is truly impressive. Our Malay students in the latest, the 2018 PISA tests, I think those were the latest, if I'm not mistaken. At age 15, our Malay students outperform the average for the OECD countries. They outperform their OECD peers in mathematics. In fact, for the first time in 2018 in mathematics, they exceeded the average for the OECD countries and were on par with them for reading and science. And they also outperformed in collaborative problem solving. The improvements in the Malay community in participation in post-secondary education and beyond have also been the largest in the last decade compared to the other ethnic groups. Partly because the starting point was lower, but the progress has been sharp and visible. So there's been very significant progress, but the gaps remain. And some of the gaps are too significant for comfort. They're too significant for comfort. The gaps are at every level, preschool, primary school, and at every level. The gaps are both socio-economic, irrespective of race, but there are also gaps by ethnic group. In other words, The gaps faced by the Malay community are not just because Malays are overrepresented in the lower socio-economic groups. Even within the lower socio-economic groups, there's a greater preponderance of Malays who start off weak and continue weak, even within the lower, let's say the bottom 20% on the socio-economic ladder. There's a difference there too between ethnic groups. And that's why we see a larger proportion of Malays in our learning support program at Primary 1 for English and our learning support for mathematics. It's not just because of low socioeconomic status. There's an additional complex set of factors that we have to address. And that's why community effort is critical. The government is doing more. MENDAKI, MQ, and other community groups are doing more. But together we have to work even harder to address these early gaps. Close the early gaps amongst Malay children, between Malay children and the rest, in particular amongst Malay children in the bottom 20% of socio-economic status. MENDAKI has embarked on several initiatives, good progress so far. Kelas Matematika or KMM, Kelas Siap Sekolah, KSS. Good initiatives. We need to scale it up and work intensively on it. And recognize that these aren't problems which we solve immediately. You can't achieve results overnight. It requires persistent effort, patience, sensitivity in the way we work together with parents, and a great deal of empathy with both parents and children. So I commend what MENDAKI, MQ, and our various other community groups are doing to address this problem. But we have to work harder. The government too has to do more. We need to scale up Kids Start as we plan to do, not just scale up the numbers, but make it more intensive, a more intensive engagement of parents and children. We are making significant improvements in preschool quality. It's already very different today compared to 15 or 20 years ago, and we're going further. And we are also working harder in our primary schools through various interventions to address the needs of those who are disadvantaged or who have fallen behind, irrespective of race. So the government's efforts are irrespective of race, race neutral, strengthening Kids Start, our preschools, and our primary school interventions, LSP, LSM. In fact, for LSM, as many of you know, we're now going beyond Primary 1 and Primary 2 to Primary 3 and 4 as well, significantly expanding the scope of learning support for mathematics. So the government is doing more, and that is the race-neutral, those are the race-neutral interventions. But it does require community intervention as well. And the work you do with Malay Muslim parents and children is really critical. It has to continue through the growing years. Work harder on the earliest years, but continue the effort through the growing years. None of us can be satisfied with the incidence of absenteeism and irregular attendance, late and irregular attendance in our preschools and in our schooling system. It's not broad-based, and compared to many other countries, I think we're doing much better. But for those who face disadvantage, the lower socioeconomic groups, those not doing so well, irregular attendance is a problem, and we have to tackle it. You see it from preschool all the way through to ITE. We have to tackle it. We need a stronger wraparound every student, not just the classroom teacher and the school programs. We need a community wraparound. And we need to work as a team. The professionals in the school, the professionals and volunteers outside the school have to work as a team and not to be too seized by a division of labor that you are doing that and I will do this. There's a blurring of responsibilities when you talk about a wraparound for the child. We have to take joint responsibility. Of course, teachers will do what teachers do best, school counselors, but we need a wraparound where we are taking joint responsibility for every kid from a disadvantaged background. Every society has this problem, where performance in school is not just a function of individual talent and attributes, but is also a function of complex, multifaceted, and interlinked social problems. And we have to work harder to address those problems in Singapore. Work harder to make sure that the early disadvantages in life do not replicate themselves and become stubborn disadvantages throughout life. I think what's also important is to take the lessons we are learning from the research that has been done through the Gastro project. The Gastro project, as many of you know, involved National University Health System, KK Women and Children's Hospital, and A-Star. MENDAKI is working with them. MENDAKI and M-Cube are working now on follow-up in our preschool system. Because what Gastro showed is that the prenatal and early childhood years are critical for maternal health, for a child's health, and for a child's development. This has been broadly known internationally through a range of studies, but we find from our own data in Singapore that there's a very definitive link. And we have to pay attention to everything in those early years, starting from the prenatal experience of the mother. Gestational diabetes and maternal depression play an important role in the health of both mother and child, and they play an important role in the development of the child. So there are many issues coming out of the Gastro project that we have to address, and it will all come down to that compact of government and community action. Second issue, recognizing a broader range of merits in our meritocracy and reducing the hierarchy between different skills. It is not just about reducing gaps, it is also about developing every child. Developing every child so they develop a range of skills in their growing years. We're doing better than many of the very narrow meritocracies that you see, particularly in some other parts of Asia. But we need to do even better, to develop a broader range of skills as children grow up. We're giving some space for this. You can't keep trying to do more and more things in education. You've got to free up space as well. So MOE's done away with mid-year examinations for primary and secondary schools, starting from next year. They call it creating space for development of 21st century competencies. We've moved to a new PSLE scoring system. We've expanded DSA across all our schools. But we need to address what is still too sharp a hierarchy between the academic and non-academic skills that in fact then continues through into the workforce. There are many countries where students who are strong academically, doing okay academically, also engage in technical and hands-on skills as integral to their school experience. We have it in some schools here, School for Science and Technology, or SST for instance, but it shouldn't just be in a specialized school. Our top schools need to give students more hands-on experience. And we know, of course, that there are studies showing that creative and innovative abilities are nurtured early in life by that combination of using your mind and hand together. Hands-on learning is important. But it's important not just in developing each child individually, it's also important in reducing that hierarchy of skills. We shouldn't regard technical and applied work as something to be done by those who are not strong in academic studies. We have too sharp a distinction in Singapore, and we need to address that too. Thirdly, that sense of togetherness that has to be reinforced and strengthened as part of our future social compact. Strength of togetherness and the capability for mutual respect has to be strengthened. We don't have the sharp antagonisms that many other societies have. We have some social distances, but they tend to be informal, not antagonistic. People aren't deliberately staying away from each other. But, let's be frank, there are distances between different groups in Singapore, including our ethnic groups, and we need to close those distances in the interests of all of us and in the interests of Singapore. We have to address it by having more social mixing. More social mixing as kids grow up. Experiences matter. You only develop that sense of familiarity, the natural friendships, even the best friend forever, through experience. The regular interaction, not just in the classroom, but outside the classroom, during the weekend. It's experiences that build familiarity, friendship, and a sense of solidarity that just comes naturally. It comes naturally. The hours you spend in a dance group together, on the football or hockey field, in shoot ball, in whatever, those hours shape instincts, they shape behavior. And we have to do more. We're doing more to reduce social distances on a socio-economic basis through some structural changes in the system, changes in primary one admission rules to reduce the percentage of affiliated students, even changes in secondary one admission for schools that used to take in a significant proportion of students from affiliated primary schools. We've reduced that. So we're making changes, and the subject-based banding scheme is a very important innovation in our secondary schools. We moved away from the streaming system in primary schools to subject-based banding several years ago. We've been moving progressively to it in secondary schools, and we're now going to move fully to it in secondary schools. That too is important in encouraging social mixing. But we have to plow the CCA field a lot more intensively. We need to use CCA much more intensively to develop social mixing. And it's not just more CCA, it is more mixing during CCA. It has to be in the mind of every school principal, the vice principals, the teachers in charge, to look out for those who feel they don't belong to a particular CCA and bring them in. Too many of our CCAs have become close to mono-ethnic. And then you think about international competitions, you're competing against people of all kinds of ethnicities. So it makes no sense. We are not taking enough advantage of CCAs to develop that regular weekly interaction several times a week. Basketball, volleyball, even football. Today's teams are different from the teams in the 1980s. We all know that. Shouldn't be the case. Shouldn't be the case. But it starts from young. And it has to be part, you don't want a quota system, but it has to be part of the thinking of school leadership. How to encourage, in primary school and secondary school, the kids to play together, train together, win and lose together. That is a responsibility in education as well. So that's one element of it, social mixing. But there's another element in developing the sense of togetherness that we need for our future, a stronger sense of togetherness. And that is that we have to develop a capability for healthy civic discourse as children grow up. A capability for healthy civic discourse. Recognizing that we are becoming a society with a pluralism of views and individual preferences. We are becoming a more pluralistic society. And we must not just live and let live or look askance at each other. We have to understand and respect differences, find compromises where possible, and develop consensus. And that ability to develop consensus, respect each other, is one that you develop as you grow up as well. And that too has to be part of what education is about, building that ability. It's an ability that has to be developed for healthy discourse, thinking through differences, thinking about compromises that are necessary, but very importantly, respecting different views and preferences. That too is important. So I think, these are all doable challenges. We have a system that's not only not broken, it's actually working much better than in most other countries. But we have to put more effort into these areas, closing the early gaps, which are both socio-economic and ethnic, through community and government action, broadening the range of merits we are recognizing and promoting, and reducing a hierarchy of different skills when young and through life, and finally developing that strong sense of togetherness and that capacity to respect each other and respect different views and preferences in a more pluralistic society, so that we remain together as Singaporeans, and our first identity is I am a Singaporean. Thank you.